Hello and welcome back to another EDH deck tech idea. Today we are talking about Akul the Unrepentant. It is a 4 mana 5/5 with flying and trample and an activated ability, and the costs are that you have to sacrifice 3 other creatures. If you do so, you may put a creature card from your hand onto the battlefield, activate only as a sorcery and only once each turn. This Rakdos commander follows a pretty straightforward strategy. We want to create a bunch of tokens that we can sacrifice to this activated ability and cheat out powerful creatures to gain an advantage over our opponents and simply overwhelm them. But before we can cheat creatures into play, we will need a few tokens that we can sacrifice into this ability. Cards that will help us with that are, for example, Bitter Blossom, a 2 mana tribal enchantment, and at the beginning of your upkeep you lose 1 life and you create a 1/1 black fairy rogue creature token with flying. One of the best creatures in this deck is Endrexar, Master Breeder, a 5 mana 2/2, and whenever you cast a creature spell, create X 1/1 black Thrall creature tokens, where X is that spell's mana value. When you control 7 or more Thralls, sacrifice Endrexar, Master Breeder. Either we reanimate this guy or cheat him out with a Dark Ritual. And due to the fact that we also play cheaper creatures, we can create a few black Thrall creature tokens, but most likely we won't get over 7, so Endrexar will stay on the board, as we will sacrifice those Thrall tokens into Akul's ability. And due to the fact that we put that creature card from our hand onto the battlefield, it doesn't count as a cast, so we won't create X black Thrall creature tokens equal to the creature's CMC that we cheat into play with Akul's ability. Lagomos, Hand of Hatred. This is, for example, one of the cheaper creature sets we also want to play in this deck. A 3 mana 1/3, and at the beginning of combat on your turn, create a 2/1 red elemental creature token with trample and haste, and sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step. We can also tap him and search our library for a card and put it into our hand and then shuffle, but we can only activate this ability if 5 or more creatures died this turn. Lagomos does it all for us. He will create a token that we can sacrifice into Akul's ability, and with the 2 other creatures that need to die for this ability and a few more that we can do in this turn, we can also tutor for a card. Ophiomancer, a 3 mana 2/2, and at the beginning of each upkeep, if you control no snakes, create a 1/1 black snake creature token with Death Touch. Ophiomancer will provide us with a bunch of blockers, and in our upkeep we will get another snake which we can sacrifice into Akul's ability. Jadar, Ghoulcaller of Nephalia, a 2 mana 1/1, and at the beginning of your end step, if you control no creatures with Decayed, create a 2/2 black zombie creature token with Decayed. Just another really helpful token creation card when it comes to sacrifice decks. We also play Kranko, Tin Street Kingpin, a 3 mana 1/2, and whenever it attacks, put a +1/+1 counter on it, then create a number of 1/1 red goblin creature tokens equal to Kranko's power. Kranko is not only a great token engine in this deck, but if he sticks around for a few turns he becomes a threat by himself. And now let's talk about creatures that we want to cheat into play, for example Razaketh the Foul-Blooded. An 8 mana 8/8 with flying and trample and an activated ability where we have to pay 2 life and sacrifice another creature, so we can search our library for a card, put that card into our hand and then we shuffle. If we manage to cheat this one out, we will have 13 power in the air with Akul and Razaketh by themselves, and having the ability to instant speed sacrifice one of our creatures to tutor for a card is extremely scary. Sheoldred Whispering One, a 7 mana 6/6 with Swamp Walk, which means that she's unblockable if defending player controls a swamp, and at the beginning of your upkeep, return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. At the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, that player sacrifices a creature. We might find ourselves in a spot where we can't sacrifice 3 tokens to Akul's ability, and especially in those situations Sheoldred is great, as she will find our non-token creatures back to our battlefield in our upkeep. Rakdos the Muscle, a 5 mana 6/5 with flying and trample, and whenever you sacrifice another creature, exile cards equal to its mana value from the top of target player's library. Until your next end step you may play those cards, and mana of any type can be spent to cast those spells. You can sacrifice another creature, so Rakdos the Muscle gains indestructible until end of turn. You have to tap it and you can activate only once each turn. Akul and Rakdos can become a really scary combination of creatures, as we can exile a bunch of cards from our opponent's libraries, by sacrificing a lot of creatures on our board. Ancient Brass Dragon, a 7 mana 7/6 with flying, and when it deals combat damage to a player, roll a d20. When you do, put any number of target creature cards with total mana value X or less from graveyards onto the battlefield under your control, where X is the result. Ancient Brass Dragon also allows us to put creature cards from our opponent's graveyards onto the battlefield, and those creatures we can sacrifice again into Akul's ability to cheat another big threat into play. We are also in red, so we also play Ancient Copper Dragon, a 6 mana 6/5 with flying, and when it deals combat damage to a player, roll a d20. You create a number of treasure tokens equal to the result. Creating an even bigger mana advantage is never a bad thing, and a 6/5 in the air is also a nice creature to have. Pathrazer of Ulamog, an 11 mana 9/9 with Annihilator 3, so when this creature attacks, defending player has to sacrifice 3 permanents, and it can't be blocked except by 3 or more creatures. And now let's talk about a few helpful enchantments. For example, Black Market, a 5 mana enchantment, and whenever a creature dies, put a charge counter on Black Market. At the beginning of your pre-combat main phase, add 1 black mana for each charge counter on Black Market. It might happen that Akul gets removed repeatedly, so at least getting a charge counter on Black Market will help you to make that recast a little bit more easier. Warstorm Surge, a 6 mana enchantment, and whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, it deals damage equal to its power to any target. You might be thinking about all of those high-powered creatures that we want to cheat in with Akul, but don't forget about our token creation, which will also be small amounts of damage that can also add up really quickly. Grave Pact, a 4 mana enchantment, and whenever a creature you control dies, each other player sacrifices a creature. In the best case scenario, you have Grave Pact on the field and enough tokens to activate Akul's ability, which will force all of your opponents to sacrifice 3 creatures. Dreadhorde Invasion, a 2 mana enchantment, and at the beginning of your upkeep you lose 1 life and amass zombies 1. Whenever a zombie token you control with power 6 or greater attacks, it gains lifelink until end of turn. Yep, this is another enchantment that you can play in the early game and profit from a lot of tokens it will create over the whole game. Rising of the Day, a 3 mana enchantment, and creatures you control have haste, and legendary creatures you control get +1/+0. Cheating a lot of powerful threats into play is really nice, but they will be removal target number 1, so giving them haste should ensure you some payoff of those creatures. Rakdos Joins Up, a 5 mana legendary enchantment, and when it enters the battlefield, return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield with 2 additional +1/+1 counters on it. Whenever a legendary creature you control dies, Rakdos Joins Up deals damage equal to that creature's power to target opponent. You are playing a bunch of legendary creatures in this deck, which we want to cheat out with Akul, and Rakdos Joins Up is another nice insurance. And now let's cover a few utility artifacts. Wand of Orcus, a 3 mana legendary artifact equipment, and whenever a equipped creature attacks or blocks, it and zombies you control gain Death Touch until end of turn. Whenever a equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, create that many 2/2 black zombie creature tokens, and you can also equip it for 3 mana. Wand of Orcus is extremely powerful in this deck because Akul is already a flying trample creature, and even if your opponents manage to block it in the air, you can assign just 1 damage to the creature, as Akul will get Death Touch due to the wand, which means that Akul will still deal 4 damage to the player and will end up in you getting 4 2/2 black zombie creature tokens. So in your second main phase you can still use its ability. Skull Clamp, a 1 mana artifact equipment, and equipped creature gets +1/-1, and whenever a equipped creature dies you draw 2 cards. We are creating a bunch of small token creatures which we can equip with Skull Clamp to draw a few more cards. Vat of Rebirth, a 1 mana artifact, and whenever another artifact or creature you control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, put an oil counter on Vat of Rebirth. For 3 mana, tapping it and removing 4 oil counters from it, return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield and activate this ability only as a sorcery. Urabrask Forge, a 3 mana artifact, and at the beginning of combat on your turn, put an oil counter on Urabrask Forge. Then create an X1 red Phyrexian horror creature token with trample and haste, where X is the number of oil counters on Urabrask Forge. Sacrifice that token at the beginning of the next end step. Not only is the Forge a nice token creator engine, but those tokens will also hit really hard after a few turns. Idol of Oblivion, a 2 mana artifact which you can tap to draw a card and activate only if you created a token this turn. You can also pay 8 mana, tap it and sacrifice it to create a 10/10 colorless Eldrazi creature token. Yeah, this is pretty secured card draw for your deck as you are creating so many tokens. And Chromatic Lantern, a 3 mana artifact, and lands you control have add 1 mana of any color, and you can also tap it to add 1 mana of any color. Akul costs 2 black and 2 red, which is quite manageable in modern mana bases, but Chromatic Lantern is always a great ramp artifact. You want to win more? You get it. Blightsteel Colossus, a 12 mana 11/11 trample, infect and indestructible, and if Blightsteel Colossus would be put into a graveyard from anywhere, reveal it and shuffle it into his owner's library instead. If you manage to cheat this one out with Akul in the early game, you might be able to knock out a player within one turn. And another really cool card for this deck is Curse of the Relentless Dead, a 3 mana enchantment aura and enchant player. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under enchanted player's control, you create a 2/2 black zombie creature token with Decayed. You will most likely enchant the player which is ramping the most at your table, and with that you will not only create an army of zombie tokens, but you will also create a lot of sacrifice fodder for Akul the Unrepentant. Alright guys, these were a few cards that I will play in Akul the Unrepentant. Let me know down in the comments below which cards you would add to the deck, which legendary creature I shall feature next, and then I will say see you in the next one. Bye guys.